there was a change made to this Zeo fight recently that makes it a little bit harder to one-shot, but there's still ways to get around it, so we'll be going over the ways to one-shot it anyways, regardless of what Small Gate tries to do. So the change that happened is that here, this passive, after being attacked when health is 40% or less, grants an extra turn. This was, I guess, technically bugged before, where Sigurd's extra turn would proc before Zeo's, which I don't think is supposed to happen because he's a boss. I think boss extra turns usually take precedent one way or another, and the exact mechanics of why and how aren't necessarily known, but from what I remember, especially in Abyss bosses, their extra turns always go first. So that means it is harder to one-shot it now, because you can't just S2 into S3 and one-shot him. He's going to get this extra turn in S3, and his S3 deals 30% of your max HP, and it also steals all of your buffs, and it also gives him a couple of buffs, I think, even if you don't have any. The main thing is that he's going to steal the stealth from Ross, so you're not even going to be able to target him. He also cleanses all debuffs at the start of his turn, so the Death Break is going to get cleansed when he gets his extra turn. So there's just, you can't do the usual S2 into S3 one shot. So first, I'll be going over the general fight mechanics, because I'm assuming that a lot of people, maybe in the future watching this, have not seen the first video, so they won't know the fight mechanics. So I'll go over how those work, and then I'll also go over how we get through the forced CO S3 under 40% in a few different methods. So this is going to be the general mechanics for this one shot. The gear I'll show later, because this is just the mechanics. At the start of the fight, Zeo will S3 into Ross. His S3 always targets knights, so Ross will always get hit. Ross gets stunned. The Vivian has an EE that lets her S3 cleanse one debuff from all allies. So we can do this, and now the stun is gone from Ross. She also gives us attack buff and immunity buff. The immunity buff is nice because his S1 has a 75% chance to silence, so this way you can't get silenced or anything. And we're going to S2 with Ross, which is not listed here, but in his skill tree there is a 60% chance to Death Break, and it's probably going to miss, so if it does miss, I'll just cut to whenever it does actually land. Okay, we actually hit it. So you land the Death Break. Sigrid uses her S1 because he pulls the duel, and now we can add an S3 for damage. So Vivian dies here. I didn't bring a supporter, but this would normally be where your supporter hops in. And then the old method would be you Soulburn S2, gives an extra turn. So you S2, he'll drop below 50%. You proc S1, and then you S3. And we can see what happens here. S2, S1. I didn't Soulburn it because it doesn't work. But Zeo will S3. Steal all of our buffs, and you can see he also got a little bit of extra buffs. Like, I think this crit chance and the barrier are just ones that he just grabs for himself. And now you have to finish out this fight one way or another with whatever HP he has left. And there's going to be a few ways for us to get around this, so let's get into them. So even though Zeo now guarantees his extra turn below 40% HP, if you have enough damage on your Sigrid, or borrow a very high damage Sigrid as your supporter, you can simply one-shot him with just their S2 and S1, and then the fight will end anyways. So this pretty much ignores the fact that he gets the extra turn guaranteed now, because the fight will be over. And of course we're going to need pretty high damage on Adden as well to lower his HP. So we can take a look at the stats needed for this. For Vivian, as usual, you need the S3, the spell E to get the stun off of Ross is the most important part. And then after this, none of these stats matter except for speed. About 190 to 200 is fine. You just want her to move first, but make sure she's not too fast, because you want to make sure she doesn't cut Zeo, or she doesn't cut Sigrid, or Zeo will get his CR push and potentially cut Sigrid. For Artifact, since she's not doing anything but pressing S3, a stat boosting artifact might be better. We have Warhorn on Ross already, so we're going to be looking for whatever you've got really. Any sort of attack boosting artifact like Card of Small Miracles, Super Duper Water Shooter, crit chance boosting ones like Midnight Pizza Delivery, whatever you have. Next up is Ross. He's also only really pressing S2, so all you need is about 160 speed, so he moves after Zeo. And then also a bit of effectiveness to land Death Break more consistently, as well as Warhorn to boost the attack of Sigrid and Added. Now we've got Added, who can be replaced with any high single target damage dealer, but she's got really good utility alongside her damage, because her S3 actually does a ton of damage, but it also gives 10% extra damage to Sigrid, and she's got a rune in her skill tree, which gives everybody 7% crit chance, which is why we can get away with our crit chance being as low as 93. About 140 speed, so she moves before Sigrid and after Ross, and then the rest of the stats into attack and crit damage. Destruction, pen sets. You can use crit set if you don't have pen set. And then if you're using a supporter Sigrid instead of your own, you're just going to want to put all your best gear onto Added instead, because her damage is pretty relevant for trying to truly one-shot him. And then for Artifact, I'm using Portrait of the Saviors, but any damage boosting artifact works fine, like Symbol of Unity. Lastly, there's Sigrid. Like I mentioned, if you can't gear this to full one-shot, or even just one-shot him low enough that you can finish the fight normally, then borrow a friend Sigrid. So this is the Sigrid that I'm using. She's got Rage, Pen, and you need at least 125 speed or so that Zeo won't cut her. And we can go as low as 93% crit chance because of Added. The rest of the stats into attack and crit damage. One thing to be careful is that since we're not using attack set and we're using Rage, you definitely want to make sure that your Sigrid has more attack than your Added if she's using attack set or something. Artifact, S1 damage boost, because our S2 is definitely going to get him below 50% HP or you're not going to one-shot him anyways. And then a damage boosting artifact. Something like this is the anniversary one, or if you don't have this, just use Symbol of Unity. You can take a look at the quality of gear I'm working with. Some of these aren't really anything, like this F is useless. This is just low. This one's actually pretty good. I said the ring's pretty good. And then this is a lot of HP, so it's kind of fake gear score. And this is also good, but I'm pretty much 10 speed overcapped, so the speed isn't really that relevant. Either way, because you can just borrow a friend Sigrid, it's not too important whether or not your Sigrid is good. If your rage set rolled bad for all the new players with their free rage sets, you definitely want to look into borrowing a Sigrid instead. And now I'll jump ahead to after Ross Lance Break, or Lance Death Break, so we can take a look at the run. Here we are, Ross Lance Death Break, and my Vivian died, but the supporter's not going to get to do anything. So we're going to use Addon S3 like normal, but because my Addon is so high damage, you can see his HP is already getting pretty low. And now so long as Sigrid doesn't die before she gets her turn, you can just use S2, and with enough damage, Zeo will be dead. Now, of course, that was with my own geared Sigrid, and not everybody's going to be able to do that. So instead, we've got a friend Sigrid here. And I'll show you how to do this. All you got to do is remove your Sigrid, because when you have an empty slot, any supporters will instantly move into that slot. So if we go into this fight now, you'll see that the Sigrid is already here, and you can just continue as normal and try to one-shot with it. If you don't have enough damage on your Sigrid, and you can't find anybody with a high damage Sigrid anywhere, you can also pretty much just play the fight as intended, but we use this one-shot to jumpstart the fight. Ideally, you'd be doing enough damage to push him pretty far below 40%, so you can skip a good portion of the fight anyways, and then just use a really strong Bruiser unit to help you clear out the rest of the fight. Afternoon Soak Fawn is really good for this, I think. She's got that auto crit, full evasion, so she doesn't really take that much damage, and then everybody who's still alive can use their S1s to pull her for the duel, and she'll be able to mop up pretty easily. Aside from that, the pretty common options are stuff like Navy Captain Landy, maybe Abyssal Euphine, pretty much any bruiser with good bulk and potentially sustain. So we can take a look at the stats needed for this. Vivian, she doesn't need all of these stats. All she really cares about is the speed for this, because we need her to die and bring in our supporter in the last phase. Most importantly though, make sure you have this EE, S3, dispel 1 debuff from all allies. This is to get rid of the stun on Ross. And then for artifact, the symbol doesn't matter because we're having her die. So even though it's not mandatory anymore, I think Talking Hells is still really good if you're doing this Bruiser method, because you can use these souls for useful soul burns, stuff like Afternoon Soak Flans got Ignore F-Res for 10 souls for her Death Break on S3, Navy Captain Landy, Soulburn S1 for the guaranteed extra attack, and then something like even Addon's got that 20 soul Ignore F-Res on her S3 as well. And then there's Ross. Because we're going to be in an extended fight, his HP and defense is a bit more important, so you do want to give him some real gear. 160 speed though, so he goes before Addon and Sigrid, but also after Zeo, since you want Ross to go after so his Death Break doesn't get cleansed. And then a bit of effectiveness as well in order to land the Death Break on Zeo more consistently. And then for his artifact, Warhorn as usual for the attack buff for all allies. If you need crit chance, something like Midnight Bloom or Midnight Pizza Delivery would work well as well. And then next up is Addon. Addon, as usual, can be replaced by really any high damage dealing unit. She's just got really good damage and also pretty good utility due to the 7% crit chance that she gives for all allies, which is why her crit chance is not 100%. You can go as low as 93 with her on your team. And also the weakness shared on her S3 increases Sigrid's damage a little bit. And then for her stats, it's just full damage with about 140 speed. You just want her to go after Ross and before Sigrid. Her F doesn't really matter because we're typically relying on Ross's Death Break because you're going to want Sigrid's S1 damage to hit into Death Break as well. And then for artifact, I'm using Portrait, but since this is in longer fight, because we're not fully one-shotting him, something like Symbol or Elia's or a damage boosting artifact, if you have both of the anniversary ones, would be good. Just because Portrait only works when he's above 50% HP. And then lastly is Sigrid. Sigrid, same thing, full damage, and you want a little bit of speed. About 125 maybe should be fine, so that she doesn't get cut by Zeo, and if he cuts her, he's going to lose his Death Break. Aside from that, it's just full damage. Probably, if you have Rage Gear, since all new players just get a free Rage set at this point, you should use the Rage Gear. Just make sure that her attack is lower than, or her attack is higher than Addon's, so that she's the one who gets pulled for a Ross's S2. Artifact, any damage boosting artifact works. If you don't have this one, you can just use Symbol. And then for her EE, I'm using the S1 damage EE. If your damage is much lower, you can use the one that changes her S2 so that it'll activate S1 a little bit earlier. Or you could choose to not do that if your damage is really low and just soul burn and then just S2 into S3 instead. That might be higher damage for you. And then if you have a pen set lying around, you should use that as well because that's higher damage than crit set. This is just a low geared wreck version. And of course, like I mentioned, your Bruiser of choice in your supporter slot. The one I'll be using is Afternoon Soak Flan. And then I'm going to jump ahead to after Ross lands his Death Break. Okay, so Ross finally landed his Death Break. And we can see that Afternoon Soak Flan is in because Vivian died. So we are going to get Zeo below 40%. And then Flan will do the cleanup for us. So we're going to S3 with Addon. It's going to chunk his HP down a bit. Now we're going to S2 with Sigrid. There's not any point in having the souls for a soul burn because he's going to get stealth after this anyways. So now he's got all of this stuff. We're going to S3 with Ross to get Death Buff. And then at this point, you're just waiting for him to get out of stealth. And now we can just dump all of our damage into him. So we're going to use S1 so we can proc Flan's passive. And it shouldn't be too bad with any decently cured Flan to just kill him and the fight is done. And then lastly, if you just don't want to think about the fight, or you've done this a bunch of times, you do have the option to spend 50 Sky Stones to revive your team. This does cost a little bit, of course, with Sky Stones being pretty important currency. In the Garo shop, one Covenant roll is about 270, or it's about 71 Sky Stones, and a Mystic roll is about 271 Sky Stones per roll. So just to get a bit of reference on how much of rolls you're losing, it's not that much, but it is a little bit. But if you just don't want to think about the fight anymore, it is an option. One thing to keep in mind is that when you revive, your supporter will not revive with you. So if you bring a supporter, they'll only be there for your first life and not your second one. So you do want to bring a full team. And then, of course, this is going to be pretty similar to the second one in the sense that it's an extended fight. But we can take a look at their stats one more time. So for Vivian, because she will be reviving and coming back, we do want actual gear on her this time. You still want the same speed thing with her S3 Dispel EE. But this time, we are going to give her Symbol. You could also use Tagahells if you think the souls are more useful than Vivian's damage. And then aside from the speed and artifact and the EE, you just want to give her full damage. Crit chance, because we have Addon, we can go as low as 93. And the next thing is Ross. Same as in the second method, you do want actual bulk on him because we're doing a drawn-out fight. And then 160 speed, so he goes after Zio and also before added, with a little bit of F, so he can land his Death Break. Wherefore, as usual, to boost the attack of all of the other people. Addon, you just build her full damage, ideally Destruction and Pen Set. Because it's an extended fight instead of Portrait, you might want to just use Symbol or Elias so that you don't lose the artifact after Zio drops below 40%. And then it's just full damage. F is optional, but maybe nice to have, so you can land Death Break on her S3. And then 140 speed, so she goes after or before Sigrid and after Ross. And then lastly is Sigrid. She's just full damage. You could use better gear. I'm just minimizing it for the setup. And about 125 speed, so that she does not get so she doesn't get cut by Zio and he won't lose his Death Break. For chance, of course, you can go as low as 93 because we have Addon on the team. And then any damage boosting artifact works fine. If you don't have the anniversary ones, you can just use Symbol of Unity. And then for EE, I'm using the S1 damage one, though you do have the option of using this one that makes her S2 proc when he's below 75% HP instead. Though if you don't have enough damage to get him below 50% after using S2, you might want to just give Vivian Tagahells if you have it, so you can S2 into S3 without proccing S1, should be higher damage. And up there for the stats, and I'll jump ahead to after Ross lands his Death Break. Once again, we're here. Ross landed his Death Break. It's Addon's turn. And I'll mention that I intentionally didn't bring a supporter into this fight, but you should bring one if you... well, just bring whatever your best Bruiser supporter is, because I wanted to be able to show this method better and differentiate it a little bit. So we're going to do the usual thing, add an S3, Sigurd S2, chunk him, Zio does his S3 thing. So now we're going to just try and do as much damage as we can. Okay, so not everybody's dead, but they added a thing recently where you can pay 50 Sky Stones to continue the fight. And yes, it does cost 50 Sky Stones, which kind of sucks because Sky Stones is our rolling currency. This is in the Garo shop. It's about 71 Sky Stones per roll, so you're losing a little bit less than a cover roll. And because you can see the other two methods, as long as you have a good supporter, you are able to still one-shot this, or at least pseudo one-shot it pretty easily. So if you don't want to use Skystones, then you can just use one of the previous methods, get a good supporter to pull you through this. But if on the other hand, you are just sick of dealing with this fight and you don't want to spend any more time setting it up, pay the 50 Skystones, all of your units come back at full HP. The one dangerous thing is that they don't necessarily start out at the top of the CR bar, so you are still going to take a good amount of damage. But now, all of your units are back, and you'll be able to dump more damage into Zio and try to kill him from here. And here, we can just kill off Zio, thanks to the revive. He does his final S3. Oh, he's not dead. Okay, well now he should be dead. And the stage is over. So since this new one-shot setup is probably reliant on supporters for you, let's go over the supporter refreshing mechanics so that you can try again with the same supporters and also get new ones. So in order to refresh your supporter list, let's say this guy Sigurd is really jacked, and let's just say stuff happens, Ross doesn't land his death break, so we can pretend the run failed. We yield, and if I go back in, his Sigurd's not here. So the way you get it back is, as long as you didn't actually clear the stage, you just go in 2 more times with the other 2 supporters. Now it's down to just 1. You just go in once, yield. And once you do that, the same 3 supporters should show up. These won't change until you actually clear a stage with them. So now, let's say we want to get rid of these supporters. Like, let's say that guy Sigurd isn't there. It's something else that we don't need, and we're trying to refresh to get a cigarette or a candy maybe, and we want to get rid of these. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to go into probably unrecorded history, do any stage with these supporters. Let's just set this auto battle to 3, and then we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, so the repeat battling finished, and that should be all 3 supporters used up. So now, if we go into try again, we can see we have a new set of 3. So basically, if you're trying to keep the same supporters, just yield the fight again if you fail with the other 2 supporters, and your same 3 will show up. And if you want a new set of 3, then you should clear stages with the supporters that you have in order to get a new set of 3, and this would give you all of their supporters to work through with. And that is it for the updated Zio one-shot. So it kind of sucks that it's harder now. I guess this is just standardizing it with other bosses. But nonetheless, it's still not too hard to pull off, especially with the Skystone thing, if you just want to get it over with. I may or may not regret this, but since I don't really use this account, I'm going to keep my cigarette on the Rage Pen one, and if you leave a comment in the video and just ask and just send a friend request to this IGN Jumpy Boomer. I'm on global server, and if you let me know that you sent the friend request and what your IGN is, I will accept it, and you will have a couple of days to get this one shot done because I do not log onto this account frequently, and after a couple of days I think I stopped showing up on your list. But yeah, if you need a cigarette, which my cigarette isn't the best, of course, you might be able to find a better one, but if you need at least a cigarette that is capable of doing large amounts of damage, you can send me a friend request. The thing is, new players with their free rage set probably have better rage gear than most veterans at this point, which is kind of funny to think about. But anyways, good luck to anybody attempting this one shot.